Imagine this, you're sitting in a hospital room. Across from you sits a doctor holding the results of a genetic test. After a few seconds of silence, they finally speak. Your baby has inherited a rare genetic condition. There's a chance they'll spend their life in constant hospitals. Their bones could break from something as simple as falling while learning to walk. They may need dozens of surgeries before they even become an adult. Or maybe the doctor tells you something even more devastating. Your child has Tay-Sachs disease, a rare inherited condition with no cure. Most children born with the infantile form begin losing their ability to crawl, walk, talk, and swallow before eventually passing away in early childhood. And then the doctor asks a question no parent ever wants to hear. Would you like to continue with the pregnancy? For some families, this isn't a thought experiment. Modern medicine can sometimes detect severe inherited conditions before a child is even born, which raises one of the most uncomfortable questions on the internet. If you knew your child would inherit a life of pain, is it ethical to knowingly take that risk? Greetings, citizen. It is I, your Honorable President Dalistoo. And in this country, we don't just react to what is happening on the internet. We think, we question, and we understand. Today's discussion isn't about attacking disabled people. It isn't about deciding who deserves to become a parent. And it definitely isn't about pretending there's an easy answer. It's about understanding one of the most emotionally charged debates I've seen online. Because every time I come across videos of disabled people on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube or television, I always see comments like this. Why would they have children? That's selfish. They are setting that child up to suffer. Some people believe choosing to have a biological child knowing you could pass on a serious inherited condition is irresponsible. Others believe that asking disabled people not to have children is discriminatory and treats their lives as less valuable than everyone else's. Both sides believe they are protecting someone. One side says they are protecting the future child. The other says they are protecting the rights and dignity of disabled people. So instead of asking who's right, I think the better question is, why do so many people disagree so passionately? Because once you start pulling on this thread, you realize this conversation isn't only about disability. It's about suffering, it's about choice, it's about parenthood, human rights, and where society should or shouldn't draw the line. Let's talk about the beautiful couple that started the debate. A family that finds themselves at the center of this discussion is Antoine and Dejua, who appeared on TLC's My Extraordinary Family. If you've spent enough time online, there's a good chance you've seen clips of them. Sometimes they're cooking together, sometimes they're joking with one another, sometimes they're documenting life with their daughter. And almost every time, the comments become a debate. This is so selfish. If you think this is selfish, you don't believe disabled people have the right to exist. Lots of love to this sweet family. So the caretaker is taking care of 3 broken kids. Why didn't they just adopt? This is actually so wrong. So selfish. Antoine and Dejua both live with Osteogenesis Imperfecta, often called OI or brittle bone disease. It's a rare inherited genetic condition that affects the body's ability to produce healthy collagen. Collagen is one of the main proteins that gives bones their strength. Without enough healthy collagen, bones become much more fragile. For some people with OI, this might mean breaking a few bones during childhood. For hundreds, it can mean multiple fractures. For others, it can mean living with hundreds of fractures over a lifetime, requiring multiple surgery, mobility aids, and ongoing medical care. The important thing to understand is that OI is not the same for everyone. Some people have relatively mild forms and live independently. Others experience severe physical disability. That distinction matters because when people online hear the words brittle bone disease, they often imagine the worst possible outcome. But reality is much more complicated. Despite living with OI, Antoine and Dejua decided they wanted to become parents. Eventually, they welcomed the daughter, Atara. Publicly, they've shared that Atara also has Osteogenesis Imperfecta. However, they have not publicly disclosed her exact form of OI. And because OI exists on a spectrum, it's not possible to accurately predict what her long-time experience will be like. But for many people online, the conversation didn't stop there. It only became louder. Why are people so angry? Open the comment section beneath any viral video of disabled parents, and you'll probably find hundreds of opinions. Some are supportive, others are brutally honest, and many ask the same question. If you knew your child might inherit your condition, why take the risk? At first glance, that question sounds logical. After all, most parents say they want the very best for their child. So if someone knowingly takes a genetic risk, it's understandable why some people struggle to understand that decision, especially because today, genetic counseling and prenatal testing can sometimes identify the likelihood of certain inherited conditions before birth. For critics, the issue isn't disability itself, it's choice. They argue that when parents know there's a significant chance of passing on a severe inherited condition, they also know that they may be choosing a future that includes surgeries, chronic pain, mobility issues, or a shortened lifespan. And from that perspective, they see the decision as prioritizing becoming a parent over the potential suffering of their child. It's an emotionally powerful argument. because none of us likes the idea of a child suffering. But here is where the conversation becomes much more complicated. It assumes something that isn't always true, that disability automatically means a life not worth living. And that assumption has been challenged by millions of disabled people themselves. Because if you ask many people living with disability if they wish they were born, the answers are often far more complex than outsiders expect. Let's look beyond this one family. And before we go any further, I think it's important that we separate two conversations that often get mixed together online. The first is about disability, and the second is about severe inherited genetic diseases. Those two are not always the same thing. A person can become disabled after a car accident. Someone can lose their sight because of an illness. Someone can be born without a limb. These situations are very different from a condition that has a known chance of being passed from parent to child. If we don't make that distinction, this conversation becomes unfair from the very beginning, because not every disability is hereditary, and not every hereditary condition causes severe suffering. That's why doctors don't simply ask, "Are you disabled?" Instead, they ask about your medical history, your family history, your genetics, because every condition is different. Now, genetics isn't identity. One thing I kept seeing in the comments is people saying, if both parents have why would they risk it? The reality is more complicated. There are many different types of osteogenesis imperfecta. Some people experience very few fractures throughout their entire lives. Others experience hundreds. Some people walk independently. Others rely on wheelchairs. Some children unfortunately die shortly after birth because of the most severe forms. Others live into old age. Two people can both say, "I have OI," yet their daily lives look completely different. That's why doctors rely on genetic counseling instead of assumptions. Every family's risk is unique, but there are conditions that are different. Now let's talk about conditions that many people immediately think about when it comes to this debate. One example is Tay-Sachs disease. Tay-Sachs is a rare inherited neurological disorder. Children with the classic infantile form appear healthy when they are born, but after a few months, everything begins to change. They gradually lose their ability to crawl, then sit, then speak. Eventually, they lose their hearing, they lose their vision, their ability to swallow. Many develop seizures. This disease continues to progress until, in most cases, the child dies during early childhood. And because it's inherited, modern genetic testing can sometimes identify whether parents carry the condition before they have children. When people hear stories like that, the ethical questions become more difficult, because we're no longer discussing inconvenience. We're discussing suffering that medicine already understands. Let's talk about the internet's argument, where critics draw the line. Their argument usually sounds something like this: if you knowingly know your child has a high chance of inheriting a condition that would cause lifelong suffering, why wouldn't you prevent that suffering if you could? It's an emotionally powerful question, because almost every parent wants to protect their child. Some people compare it to any other preventable risk. If you knew your house wasn't safe, you'd fix it. If you knew your car's brakes didn't work, you wouldn't drive it. So they ask, why should reproduction be any different? Especially now that medicine can sometimes identify certain inherited conditions before birth. To many people, this isn't about judging disabled people. It's about trying to reduce suffering. And I think that's an argument that deserves to be taken seriously. Not because everyone has to agree with it, but because it's rooted in genuine concern for children. But there's a problem we run into. The moment we say people with certain conditions shouldn't have children, we immediately run into another question. Who decides which conditions qualify? Does the line begin with Tay-Sachs or severe OI? What about muscular dystrophy? What about cystic fibrosis? What about schizophrenia, which can have a hereditary component? What about severe depression, autism, deafness, blindness? Where exactly does society stop? Because once you start drawing lines, then someone has to hold the pen. And history has shown us that governments haven't always drawn those lines wisely. There's a point in history when people wanted to decide who could and could not have children. In fact, it's over 100 years old. During the early 20th century, several countries embraced an idea called eugenics. Supporters believed society could be improved by encouraging certain people to have children, while discouraging or even preventing others from becoming parents. The people targeted included those with inherited diseases. Many were poor. Some had intellectual disabilities. Others had mental illnesses. Some belonged to minority groups. Thousands were forcibly sterilized without meaningful consent because governments believed they were protecting future generations. At the time, many people thought they were doing the right thing. History remembers it differently. That's why conversations about reproduction and disability make many people understandably nervous, because they know how easily a discussion about reducing suffering can become a discussion about deciding who deserves to live and whose lives are valuable. And those two are different things. We need to listen to disabled people, because there's another perspective that's often missing from online debates: the voice of disabled people themselves. Many people living with disability don't see their lives as tragedies. Yes, some live with chronic pain, some require assistance, some face barriers every single day, but many also build careers, fall in love, raise families, travel, love, contribute to society. So when critics say, "I don't want that life," many disabled people respond, "You're imagining my life from the outside." Those two perspectives don't always match. And that's an important reminder. Quality of life isn't always something we can measure from a medical chart. Sometimes people living that reality see it differently than people watching from the sidelines. Is there a right answer? By now we've had two very different arguments. One side says knowingly bringing a child into this world knowing they are going to have a severe inherited condition is unfair to that child. The other side says nobody decides whose life is worth living. Both arguments are trying to protect someone. One protects the future child. The other protects the freedom and the dignity of disabled people. That's what makes this conversation very difficult, because neither side is necessarily motivated by hate. They are motivated by different values. One values reducing suffering. The other values individual autonomy. The question is, what happens when those values collide? We need to talk about the fact that the child doesn't get to choose. One argument I kept coming back to while researching this video is no child chooses the circumstances they are born into. None of us chose our parents. None of us chose our country. None of us chose our genes. Life has always been something we receive, not something we design. But modern medicine has changed that conversation. Today, for some inherited conditions, parents can learn about certain genetic risks before their baby is born. That knowledge creates a question previous generations never had to answer. If you know there's a significant chance your child could inherit a severe condition, does knowing change your responsibility? Or is becoming a parent always an act of accepting uncertainty? Here's the truth. Even parents with perfect genetics cannot guarantee a healthy child. Children can develop illnesses later on in life. Accidents happen. Pregnancies have complications. No parent can eliminate suffering. They can only try to reduce it. So perhaps the real ethical question isn't, can parents prevent all suffering? It's how much risk is acceptable. And that's where people begin to disagree. What about genetic testing? Some viewers might be wondering, if genetic testing exists, why wouldn't everybody use it? The reality is that genetic testing isn't a simple yes or no solution. Some families use it to prepare emotionally and medically for the birth of a child with additional needs. Others use it to make decisions on whether to continue the pregnancy. Some people decline testing altogether because of personal, cultural, or religious beliefs. And in many parts of the world, advanced genetic testing simply isn't available or affordable. So even medicine doesn't provide one universal answer. It provides information. What people do with that information is deeply personal. We need to distinguish the difference between risk and uncertainty. I think it's another distinction worth making. There's a difference between accepting risk and accepting uncertainty. Imagine two scenarios. In the first, doctors tell a couple there's a small chance their child could inherit a medical condition. In the second, the doctor tells a couple that there's almost certain chance their child will inherit a severe medical condition or life-limiting disease. Most people instinctively feel those situations are different. The closer the risk moves towards uncertainty, the more difficult the ethical question becomes. That's why these conversations should always focus on the specific medical condition, not on disability as a whole. Because every condition has different prognosis, different treatments, different quality of life, different inheritance patterns. Reducing every disability to one conversation isn't just inaccurate, it's unfair. So what do I think? I'll be honest. When I first started researching this topic, I thought I'd eventually arrive to a clear answer. I didn't. Instead, I found myself understanding both sides more than I expected. I understand why someone would say, I would never knowingly risk bringing a child into the world who could suffer so much. I also understand why a disabled person would hear that and think, are you saying my life isn't worth living? Those are two completely different conversations. And yet, people online often argue as if they are the same. I don't think every disagreement needs a winner. Sometimes the most valuable conversations are the ones that force us to examine our own beliefs. This is one of those conversations. Because whether you agree or disagree, you're really answering a much bigger question. What makes life worth living? Is it health, happiness, independence, the absence of pain? Or is life valuable simply because it's life? Those aren't questions YouTube comments can answer. They've challenged philosophers, doctors, ethicists, and families for generations. And I suspect they'll continue to do so long after this video ends. Here are my final thoughts. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this discussion, it's this. Let's be careful not to reduce people into hypothetical arguments. Behind every debate, there are families, there are parents, there are children, people living with conditions most of us will never fully understand. Whether you believe severe hereditary conditions should influence reproductive decisions, or whether you believe every person has a right to become a parent regardless of disability, one thing should remain true. These conversations deserve honesty, compassion, and respect, not insults, not assumptions, and definitely not hate. Because the easiest thing to do is pick a side. The harder thing is trying to understand why the other side believes what it does. But that's just one citizen's investigation. Now I want to hear from you. Where do you draw the line? Do you think severe hereditary conditions change the ethical line or the ethical conversation? Or do you believe every person has an equal right to have biological children regardless of the risks? Let's keep this discussion respectful, because if there's one thing we've learned today, the answer isn't as simple as the internet makes it seem. I've been Dalistoo. Until the next investigation, stay curious, citizen. I love you and good night.